Friends, welcome to the 147th session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. In this journey of empowerment, interaction, and exposing ourselves to different thoughts and ideas, we have a wonderful day today on more than one count. Today is the 105th birth anniversary or birthday of Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer sir. We have our own Krishnaiyer sir here, that is Justice V. Ramkumar sir. It is his birthday as well today. So we all wish you, sir, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Ramkumar ji.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Happy birthday.
And adding to that, it is also one more person joining the bandwagon, but not with us. It is Prince Charles. It is known that it is his birthday as well. So it's the day of birthdays, and I'm sure that the importance of this day is when we understand the power of one, a vision of one person, or in which a entirely different thinking pattern can be injected to a system and revamp it. We are today remembering and also paying tribute to Justice Krishnaiyer, and to address us on that, we have got a wonderful speaker who is a senior advocate of the Supreme Court of India. He was the former Chief Justice of Himachal Pradesh, Justice M.N. Rao sir. And we are deeply indebted and thankful to Justice Kodandaram sir for introducing this wonderful speaker to this platform. And to introduce the speaker for the day would be Advocate Sri V. Krishnamohan sir. He is an advocate practicing the High Court of Telangana. Thank you, sir, for joining us. It is indeed wonderful to have you with us today. And we recognize the presence of Justice V. Ramkumar, Justice Siddharamamurthy sir, Justice Ramakrishnan sir, and all of you wonderful participants and faculty who had addressed us, Dr. V. R. K. Sagar sir, then we have Harihar Nath sir, and all of you. It has been a wonderful journey. The journey continues, and today, let us get inspired by the interaction with Justice M.N. Rao sir, and that too, while we deal with the indelible footprints of Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer. Over to you, Krishnamohan sir, for the introductory remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to participate in such a illustrious panel of speakers. And also, I deem it a privilege and thank Justice Kodandaram for giving me this opportunity to be amongst the galaxy of intellectuals of the Indian judiciary, especially Justice Parvat Rao, Justice M.N. Rao, Justice Sitharamurthy, and so on. So my credentials to introduce Justice M.N. Rao is only as his Ekalavya student. I am his Ekalavya student. Because I did not directly practice under him, nor was I a practicing lawyer when he was actively judge in the AP High Court. Subsequently, I entered. But nevertheless, I have been a great admirer of Mr. Justice M.N. Rao for his integrity and competence. I find a rare, not more than 20% of Indian judiciary judges or Indian jurists will have that kind of acute thought. At this stage especially, plus his integrity, plus his commitment to espouse the cause for which he has been interested. So therefore, I've been a great admirer of him. There is only my credentials. I'll just briefly read out the small profile of him for the benefit of others, because if I were to speak, I may commit a lot of mistakes. Therefore, I'll read out. Pardon me for that. Mr. Justice M.N. Rao practiced in the Andhra Pradesh High Court prior to his appointment as district and session judge in 1973. Between 1973 and 1983, he worked as Secretary, Law and Legislative Affairs, Government of Andhra Pradesh. In 1982, he was sent on deputation to London under the Colombo Plan for Specialized Training in Legislative Drafting and Administrative Law at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. As Secretary, Law, he authored many innovative laws like equal property rights for daughters, abolition of capitation fee, etc. He was appointed as a permanent judge of the Andhra Pradesh High Court in July 1986. He served as the Chief Justice of High Court of Himachal Pradesh from November 1997 to April 1998. As a judge of the High Court, He authored many path-breaking judgments in all branches, especially in constitutional law. After retirement, Mr. Rao practiced in the Supreme Court as a senior advocate and argued several sensitive and constitutional issues. Justice Rao is currently the chairperson of National Commission for Backward Classes, holding the status of Union Cabinet Minister. Justice Rao, who hails from Nellore district in Andhra Pradesh, has a bachelor degree in arts and law from Andhra University and a master's in law from Madras University. During 1964 and 65, Mr. Rao taught constitutional law, international affairs, and international law to postgraduate students of the Osmania University. This is all my brief introduction of the illustrious jurist of the day, Justice M.N. Rao. Over to you.
Thank you, Krishna Mohan sir. And today, when Justice M.N. Rao sir addresses us, he'll be under the watchful eye of his 6-decade-old classmate, Justice Parvata Rao. Welcome, sir. And over to you, Rao sir.
I joined the profession in 1961. With Mr. Dur Nasraju, who was Advocate General at that time. So he initiated me to practicing law, and in due course, So
yes, sir, you're audible. Yeah.
I became a judge in 1990, and retired in 1997. After 97, I was for 2 years as a Consumer Dispute Tribunal Commission president. I resigned after that because of the request of the Adhokta Parishad to be the president of its president. So I became president of Adhokta Parishad in 2000. I continued for about 12 years, or 14 years. So that's my history.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your time and space with us, sir. And now let us hear your long-standing friend and our guest of the day, Justice M.N. Rao, sir. Over to you, Justice M.N. Rao, sir.
Good morning. Good afternoon to everybody.
Almost good afternoon, sir.
Very good afternoon.
Mr. Krishna Mohan,
Yes,
you
sir.
have started me ably. You said that you had been my Ekalavya Shishya.
Yes, sir.
I am not your Dronacharya to demand your thumb. You have been one of my esteemed friends. To that extent, I admit. But I wouldn't like to call you my Ekalavya Shishya. Then my esteemed friends of the judiciary, Justice Ramakrishnan, Justice Ram Kumar, the moving spirit behind this, Shyam Padman, and then my closest friend, Justice Parvat Rao, my nephew, Justice Kodan Ram, and the other, Justice Sitaram Murthy, who acknowledges that I was responsible for his selection as the district judge. He proved himself an able judge of High Court, and I am really happy to know that. The other distinguished members of your society, I had no knowledge about the activities of your association. Suddenly, some time back, hardly a week ago, Mr. Krishna Mohan called me on phone and said, "Sir, we request you to be a speaker, to speak on Justice Krishna here." And he said, the Justice Kodandaram said that you should accept it. And Kodandaram always wields a lot of influence upon me. I find it difficult to say no. That's why I landed myself today in trouble, seeing plethora of evidence gathered here. I don't know how to start the subject. And the time given to me was short, and the subject is of what should I say, Himalayan dimensions, oceanic dimensions. But anyhow, I shall try to do justice, despite the fact at my age, I find it difficult to do research, collect material, and articulate my thoughts. And you know, I am in my twilight zone. You know what is twilight zone? Sunset, light is fading, darkness has not yet descended. So in between, the interregnum, we call it twilight zone. So I am in that zone, but still the pressure is such, I had no choice except to say yes. Justice Krishna Iyer, I always consider him as one of the tallest figures of the Indian judiciary. If I were to be asked who was the greatest among the Indian judges, my answer would be unhesitatingly Justice Krishna Iyer. If you ask me why and how he became the greatest, it requires a little peep into his past and also his contribution as a lawyer, as a judge, as a legislator, and also as a person fighting for public causes. Under our system, you all know it very well, adversarial system, the role of the judge is limited. He plays the role of an umpire. When the ball goes out of the field, the umpire blows the whistle. So is the judge when the advocates for both sides outstep their limits. The greatest service a judge does, social service, is disinterested application of known principles of law. The difficulty comes when one looks at the consequences of the application of law. A mechanical interpretation, unmindful of the consequences, no doubt may pass muster as a judgment in conformity with the technicalities of law. But in such cases, what is overlooked is the role of justice. What is contained in law is the justice as perceived by lawmaking bodies. If the legislature thinks that what it is doing is justice, then it enacts a law. But in actual interpretation, many facets emerge. The role of the judge on such occasions assumes great importance. If justice in its real sense is to be realized through law, that justice conforming to law can be achieved through judicial interpretation is the greatest contribution of Justice Krishna Iyer to Indian jurisprudence. Moral component of justice, in consonance with societal realities, for achieving the constitutional objectives, was the foundation on which Justice Krishna Iyer built the magnificent edifice of the Indian jurisprudence. In doing so, he had overcome successfully the obstacles that surfaced in the form of traditional principles of interpretation and the shackles of so-called binding precedents. Whenever a precedent was found to be inconsistent with sense of justice, Krishna Iyer had no hesitation to depart from it, spinning appropriate reasoning for such departure. Referring to his non-conformist attitude, he himself had admitted, realistically, that the same had the approval to a great extent of the legal fraternity. I quote, I am aware, this is what Krishna himself has said, I am aware that many of my ideas as a judge of the Supreme Court are controversial. But today, every student in the law colleges in the country and most lecturers and judges are full of appreciation of my performance, unquote. The topic given to me, the indelible footprints of Justice Krishna Iyer, is so vast and comprehensive. And to do justice for this, one has to churn out not only the decisional law in various branches laid down by Justice Krishna Iyer, but also the life and times of Justice Krishna Iyer and the different roles played by him. Such a gigantic exercise is not possible for one at my age and the time at my disposal. I therefore try to confine myself to some of the essential features to cover the subject. As a member of the Madras, this is his past. As a member of the Madras Legislative Assembly, 1952-56, he was responsible for initiating several welfare measures for benefiting agricultural tenants and laborers. He held many important portfolios as minister, like home, law, irrigation, social welfare, and prisons. In the first cabinet formed by Sri EMS Namboodiripad, legally to the poor, innovative changes in judicial administration and schemes for improvement of irrigation facilities stand out prominently as his enduring contributions. His passion for doing justice was the propelling force behind his accepting the judgeship of the Kerala High Court. 2 years after judgeship, he resigned the post and accepted the membership of the Central Law Commission of India. The studies initiated by him and the reports submitted on many legal subjects were quite innovative. His knowledge of law was encyclopedic, mastery over English was perfect, and ratiocination superb. To the legal fraternity, what would be of greatest interest about Justice Krishna Iyer is the judgments delivered by him in different branches of law, carving out new paths and his great innovative skill in giving new interpretations and new dimensions to render real justice. The indelible footprints left by him are very conspicuous in the judgments rendered by him on various branches of law: land reforms, industrial disputes, money lending, reservations in public offices and elective bodies, legal aid to the poor, prison conditions, powers of the president and governors under the constitution, public interest litigation, etc. I shall briefly refer to them. The first case of importance concerning public interest law in India was dealt by Justice Krishna Iyer in the Supreme Court, that is the Ratlam Municipal Corporation case. Ratlam municipality in the Madhya Pradesh, it is a municipal town in Madhya Pradesh. An application was filed before a magistrate under section 133 of the CRPC, complaining against neglect of sanitation facilities and non-performance of duties by the statutory body. The magistrate passed a favorable order describing in detail the ground realities, the deterioration in sanitary conditions, and the failure of the municipality to remove the nuisance. He directed municipality should prepare a permanent plan to set right the situation. The matter was taken to the High Court, which has affirmed the action of the magistrate, and ultimately the matter went to the Supreme Court. Justice Krishna Iyer, while dealing with that case, he makes wonderful observation. He says, all power is trust, that we are accountable for its exercise. Discretion becomes a duty when its beneficiary brings home the circumstances for its benign exercise, unquote. This is one of the first, perhaps the earliest path-breaking decision on public interest law in our country. Krishna Iyer rejected the plea of the municipality that due to lack of finances, the requisite work could not be taken up. I quote from the judgment, the plea of the municipality that notwithstanding the public nuisance, financial liability validly exonerates it from statutory liability has no juridical basis. The Criminal Procedure Code operates against statutory bodies and others regardless of the cash in their coffers, even as human rights under Part 3 of the Constitution have to be respected by the state regardless of budgetary provision. Likewise, Section 123 of the Act has no saving clause when the municipal council is penniless. Otherwise, a profligate statutory body or pachydermic governmental agency may legally defy duties under the law by urging in self-defense a self-created bankruptcy or perverted expenditure budget. And then he further says, a responsible municipal council constituted for the precise purpose of preserving public health and providing better finances cannot run away from its principal duty by pleading financial inability. Decency and dignity are non-negotiable facets of human rights and are a first charge on local self-government governing bodies. For the first time in the history of public interest litigation, a principle was laid down that a statutory body cannot escape its responsibility pleading want of finances. Then another important case concerns gender discrimination. The Indian Foreign Service contains a rule which mandates that a member of the Foreign Service shall obtain permission, a lady member shall obtain permission of the government before her marriage is solemnized, and she may also be required to resign from service if the government is satisfied that her family and domestic commitments are likely to come in the way of efficient discharge of duties. The observations by the time the matter came up for hearing, the rule was out of the picture. It was on its way out. But nonetheless, Justice Krishna had taken up the matter. This is what he said in the judgment. I quote, "If a married man has a right, a married woman, other things being equal, stands on no worse footing. This misogynist posture is a hangover of the masculine culture of manacling the weaker sex, forgetting how our struggle for national freedom was also a battle against the women's thraldom. Freedom is indivisible, so is justice. That our founding faith, enshrined in Articles 14 and 16, should have been tragically ignored vis-a-vis half of India's humanity, namely our women, is a sad reflection on the distance between constitution in the book and law in action. The vision of a judge, while interpreting law, is reflected. The contours within which the principles are laid down, he has not overlooked. Justice Krishna, while stating so that women and men are equal, he has not overlooked the practical aspect of the requirement of service. He says, we do not mean to universalize or dogmatize that men and women are equal in all occupations and all situations, and do not exclude the need to pragmatize where the requirements of particular employment, the sensitivities of sex, or the peculiarities of social sectors, or the handicaps of either sex may compel selectivity. But save where the differentiation is demonstrable, the rule of equality must govern. Then in the field of criminal law, Justice Krishnayar's contribution is noteworthy. In fact, he has given a new definition and a new twist to the entire concept of treatment of prisoners. On the question of bail, Justice Krishna, he says, before I take up the cases relating to the grant of bail, there is one more case which was decided in 1977, Muhammad Ghiyazuddin case. In that case, what happened was, an young man has cheated several people, promising to secure them jobs. He collected money, he was prosecuted, and ultimately he was sentenced to a term of 3 years imprisonment. In the appeal, Justice Krishna says, the infliction of harsh and savage punishment, he deprecated. But what are the aspects to be taken into consideration by the court have been highlighted. He observes, I quote, sentencing justice is a facet of social justice, even as redemption of a crime doer is an aspect of restoration of a whole personality. Till the new court recognized statutorily that punishment required considerations beyond the nature of the crime and circumstances surrounding the crime, and provided a second stage for bringing in such additional materials, the Indian courts had by and large assigned an obsolescent backseat to the sophisticated judgment on sentencing. Now this judicial skill has to come of age, unquote. The next thing is one of the important aspects of criminal law, especially treatment of prisoners, the procedure of handcuffing, and Justice Krishna dealt with it in one of the cases by name Prem Shankar Shukla versus Delhi Administration. Then I quote from his judgment: "Here is a prisoner, the petitioner who protests against his being handcuffed routinely, publicly, vulgarly, and unjustifiably in the trips to and fro between the prison house and the courthouse in callous contumely, and invokes the writ jurisdiction of the court under Article 32. He says that the raw history of human bondage and the roots of the habeas corpus writ enlighten the wise exercise of constitutional power in enlarging the person of men in unlawful detention. No longer is this liberating writ trammeled by the traditional limits of the English vintage, for our founding fathers exceeded the inspiration of the prerogative writs by phrasing the power in larger diction. That is why in India, as in the similar jurisdiction in America, the broader horizons of habeas corpus spread out beyond the orbit of release from illegal custody into every trauma and torture on persons in legal custody. You all know that when a writ of habeas corpus is filed, if the court finds that the person is in illegal detention, an order directing his release brings to an end the litigation. But Justice Krishna has gone further, and then he has laid down the conditions, the treatment to be given to the under trial prisoner. The concept and the contours of habeas corpus have been extended and enlarged by Justice Krishna. And he says, handcuffing is prima facie inhuman and therefore unreasonable, is over harsh and at the first flush arbitrary. Then the humanistic approach is reflected in the following passage: to prevent the escape of an under trial is in public interest, reasonable, just, and cannot by itself be castigated. But to bind a man hand and foot, fetter his limbs with hoops of steel, shuffle him along in the streets, and stand him for hours in the courts is to torture him, defile his dignity, vulgarize society, and foul the soul of our constitutional culture. Where then do we draw the humane line, and how far do the rules err in print and praxis? Then he has laid down how the person should be treated, and then ultimately he says, handcuffing, we lay down as necessarily implicit in Articles 14 and 19 that when there is no compulsive need to fetter a person's limbs, it is sadistic, capricious, despotic, and demoralizing to humble a man by manacling him. Such arbitrary conduct surely slaps Article 14 on the face. The criminal freedom of movement, which even a detainee is entitled to under Article 19, cannot be cut down cruelly by application of handcuffs or other hoops. It will be unreasonable so to do unless the state is able to make out that no other practical way of forbidding escape is available, the prisoner being so dangerous and desperate and the circumstances so hostile to safekeeping. Then, on the question of bail, it is very important. For the first time, a very broad view was taken on the question of keeping people under trials in jail. This is what Justice Krishna has said. In fact, he quotes the concept of equality, that all are equal before law. It is a concept which, in its practical application, renders a lot of injustice to innocent people. He quotes the French author Anatole France. The law in its majestic equality forbids the rich as well as the poor to sleep under bridges, to beg in the streets, and to steal bread. Why should rich people steal bread? Why should they sleep in the streets? But you cannot say that everybody is equal. A rich man and a poor man, both are forbidden from sleeping on the streets. So this is how he ridicules the idea that law should be meted out equally to everybody. He says the reality of this caricature of equal justice under the law whereby the poor are priced out of their liberty in the justice market, is the grievance of the petitioner. And then what he says is, here it was a mason who was asked to furnish 10,000 rupees bail to the satisfaction of the magistrate. And ultimately, poor man, he could not do it. He says, if mason and millionaire were treated alike, egregious inequality is an inevitability. Likewise, geographic allergy at the judicial level makes mockery of equal protection of the laws within the territory of India. And then we come to the basic rule may perhaps be tersely put as bail, not jail. In fact, that was the principle enunciated by him, bail, not jail. When should the bail be denied? He gives the examples. Except where there are circumstances suggestive of fleeing from justice or thwarting the course of justice or creating other troubles in the shape of repeating offences or intimidating witnesses and the like by the petitioner who seeks enlargement on bail from the court. Then what he ultimately says, it is true that the gravity of the offence involved is likely to induce the petitioner to avoid the course of justice and must weigh with us when considering the question of jail. So also the heinousness of the crime. And then in another important case, it is Sunil Batra versus Delhi administration. He speaks of the treatment of prisoners. Here, there are two petitioners. One, Sunil Batra, he was under sentence of death. The other one was Charles Sobraj. He was facing grave charges. Sunil Batra was put in solitary confinement under Section 30, subsection 2 of the Prisons Act. The prisoner under sentence of death is required to be kept in solitary confinement. See, the innovative way of interpretation of a criminal statute, we see in this case, the power to keep a person in solitary confinement, Justice Krishna says, is one of the punishments listed in Section 53 of the Indian Penal Code. The jail superintendent, in the absence of a sentence passed by the court, specifically directing that the prisoner be kept in solitary confinement, that the jail superintendent has no power to put him in solitary confinement. It is a species of punishment exclusively within the jurisdiction of the criminal court. In that view, he declared that Sunil Batra should not be solitarily confined. And then he has taken up the question of keeping a person in fetters, an under trial prisoner. He deals with the case of Shobraj, who was facing grave charges. He was an under trial prisoner. He was kept in fetters continuously. He was in detention right from 1976. The medical officer's report indicated that he had multiple infected wounds on the right ankle. The reason for putting him constantly in fetters was that he was a desperate and dangerous prisoner. Then he has issued certain directions, Justice Krishna, his jail authorities, that the conditions when fetters should be put, and for so doing, he says there must be special reasons. The basic condition, dangerous, must be recorded with reasons. Fetters should be removed at the earliest opportunity. Relief was thus granted to Sobraj, while holding that solitary confinement is not sanctioned by Section 30 of the Act. Justice Krishna nonetheless held that it is legal to separate such persons from the rest of the prison community during hours when prisoners are generally locked in. Then next comes in the field of industrial and labor relations, Justice Krishna's contribution is highly noteworthy. He has made a tremendous contribution. His judgment in Bangalore water supply and sewage board case is a classic. What is an industry was the question considered by the Supreme Court in that case. Justice Krishna, while adopting the test laid down by the Australian judge, Justice Isaacs, he says this about. We have to look at educational activity from the angle of the act, and so viewed, the ingredients of industry are fulfilled. It is one of the cases, perhaps the first case in which it was held that education is an industry. Education is therefore an industry, and nothing can stand in the way of that conclusion. It may well be said by realists in the cultural field that educational managements depend so much on governmental support, and some of them charge such high fees that schools have become trade and managers merchants. Whether this will apply to universities or not, schools and colleges have been accused, at least in the private sector, of being tarnished with trade motives. And then he speaks of how the private colleges are run. Let us trade romantics for realities and see, with evening classes, correspondence courses, admissions unlimited, fees and government grants escalating, and certificates and degrees for prices, education, legal, medical, technological, school level or collegiate, education is riskless trade for cultural entrepreneurs, and hapless posts of campus unrest, imaginary assumptions or experiments with untruth. He has gone to the extent of saying that a charitable institution also is an industry, is what he says. The fact that the whole or substantial part of the profits earned is diverted for purely charitable purposes does not affect the nature of the economic activity, which involves the cooperation of employer and employee and results in the production of goods and services. And then the very famous case on the question of reservations, that is state of Kerala versus N.M. Thomas. So it's a case where a rule framed by the Kerala government extending the period during which the persons holding the post of lower division clerk can pass the prescribed test. The period was extended in the case of scheduled caste people to 3 years. For others, it was only 2 years. And then that was challenged. That was upheld. That circular was dismissed by it was quashed by the Kerala High Court. In the Supreme Court, the circular was upheld. In fact, the Justice Krishnaiyer has considered the scope of reservations. What is important is he has laid emphasis on Article 335. For the first time, he has brought out the content of Article 335 in the background of social justice. He says this provision, that is Article 335, pointedly to the claims of not compassion towards Harijans. So this provision directs to the claims of not compassion towards Harijans to be given special consideration in the making of appointments to public services. Lest this extra attention should run riot and ruin administrative efficiency, a caution is uttered that maintenance of efficiency in administration should not suffer mayhem. So he has cautioned, although the claims of these people should be taken into consideration, their claims must be taken into consideration. It is not compassion towards them. But at the same time, he cautioned maintenance of efficiency in administration should not suffer. And then he has justified the action of the Kerala government. He says, these are the conclusions he derives. The Constitution, number one, the Constitution itself demarcates Harijans from others. This is based on the stark backwardness of this bottom layer of the community. The differentiation has been made to cover specifically the area of appointments to posts under the state. The twin objects blended into one are the claims of Harijans to be considered in such posts and the maintenance of administrative efficiency. The state has been obligated to promote the economic interests of Harijans and like backward classes. Articles 46 and 335 being a testament, and Articles 14 to 16 being the toolkit, if one may put it that way. To blink at this Panchasheel used to be unjust to the Constitution. Then he has analyzed the Keshwananda Bharati's case, and he reaches the conclusion that Article 46 has to be given emphatic expression while interpreting Article 16, 1 and 2. That means while interpreting a provision of the fundamental rights, you have to look into the directive principles, is what Justice Krishnaiyer has laid down in that case. And we are all aware the Supreme Court judgment in Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab. There has been a lot of controversy as to the nature of the powers exercised by the head of the state. Whether the head of the government is the chief minister, head of the state is the governor. When the provision says the governor shall decide, does it mean that the governor should act in his individual capacity, or is he bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers? In the case of Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab, an order was passed by the chief minister. The question arose whether the governor should pass it in his individual capacity, or the governor is bound by the advice tendered by the Council of Ministers. Then in that case, the whole gamut of the powers of the heads of state vis-a-vis the heads of government was discussed, and is what Justice Krishna says in a separate judgment. The omnipotence of the president and the governor of the state at the state level is euphemistically inscribed in the pages of our fundamental law with the obvious intent that even where express conferment of power or functions is written into the articles, such business has to be redisposed of decisively by the ministry answerable to the legislature and through it vicariously to the people. So he says it is the cabinet that is responsible for exercising power, but not the head of the state. Then the famous Maneka Gandhi case, which deals with the right to travel, although it has become infectious by the time the matter came up for hearing, nonetheless, the court has discussed the important aspect whether right to travel is a constitutional right. This is what Justice Krishna has said. From the point of view of comparative law, the position is well established. One of the essential attributes of citizenship, and he says, Professor Schwartz, is freedom of movement. The right of free movement is a vital element of personal liberty. The right of free movement includes the right to travel abroad. So much is simple textbook teaching in India as in Anglo-American law. Passport legally affecting as it does freedoms that are delicate and vulnerable as well as supremely precious in our society cannot but excite judicial vigilance to obviate fragile dependency for exercise of fundamental rights upon executive clemency. So important is the subject that watershed between a police state and a government by the people may partly turn on the prevailing passport policy. Among the great guaranteed rights, life and liberty are the first among equals, carrying a universal connotation cardinal to a decent human order and protected by constitutional armor. Truncate liberty in Article 21, dramatically, and the several other freedoms paid out automatically. Then he speaks of what is the procedure established by law in Article 21. Then he says what is procedure? What do we mean by established? And what is law? Anything formal, legislatively processed, albeit absurd or arbitrary, reverence for life and liberty must overpower this reductio ad absurdum, legal interpretation. In the last analysis is value judgment. In fact, it is very important. He says legal interpretation in the last analysis is value judgment. Procedure established by law with its lethal potentiality will reduce life and liberty to a precarious plaything if we do not necessitate import into those weighty words an adjectival rule of law, civilized in its soul, fair in its heart, and fixing those imperatives of procedural protection, absent which the processual tail will wag the substantive head. Very graphically, he says, the procedure which deals with the modalities of regulating, restricting, or even rejecting a fundamental right falling within Article 21 has to be fair, not foolish, carefully designed to effectuate, not to subvert the substantive right itself. Then the next topic on which I would like to invite your attention with regard to Justice Krishna's contribution is natural justice. Mohinder Singh Gill's case is one of the important decisions concerning the power of the Supreme Court to interfere with regard to the orders passed by the Election Commission. Whether Election Commission can, without complying with the results of, with the rules of natural justice, can order a repoll where the questions considered by Justice Krishnaiyer in Mohinder Singh. In a brilliant exposition of law on natural justice, he laid down the proposition, I quote, if to condemn unheard is wrong, it is wrong except where it is overborne by dire social necessity. And this principle is so integral to good government, the onus is on him who adjusts exclusion to make out why. Where a candidate has reached the end of the battle and the whole poll is upset, he has a right to notice and had to be heard, the quantum and quality being conditioned by the concatenation of circumstances. Justice Krishnaiyer, in this context, he refers to the principle of fair play in action. He says, I quote, our constitutional order pays more than lip service to the rule of reasonable administrative process. Our people are not yet conscious of their rights. Our administrative apparatus has a hard of hearing heritage. Therefore, a creative play of fair play, irksome to some, but good in the long run, must be accepted as part of our administrative law. And in India, this case is neither the inaugural nor the valedictory of natural justice. And then some of the important cases in which Justice Krishnaiyer has laid down legal principles, analyzing them, and then extending the contours of law. It is, in fact, that is the horizons of jurisprudence have been expanded by Justice Krishnaiyer in a variety of cases. You take any branch, labor legislation, constitutional law, reservations, jail jurisprudence, everything, prisoners' conditions. And then, if you want to know anything about a judge, his personality has to be carved out from a reading of his judgments. Justice Krishnaiyer, he emerges from a reading of his judgments as a great visionary, a prophet who looked far beyond his times, and then he never allowed the technicalities of law to overcome the realities. He won universal acclaim as a judge of the Supreme Court, a self-confessed leftist. He never succumbed to temptations of scaling greater heights with crutches. He was elected to the state legislature with the support of the Communist Party, and he was always known as a leftist. When Krishnaiyer was a minister in Namboodiripal's cabinet, Sri V.K. Krishnamen, already a leading Congress functionary, invited him to join the Congress, saying, why are you with communists who are a dying party in Madras? Why not join the Congress with the great leader Rajaji? Krishnaiyer declined the proposal, emphatically stating that he was elected with the support of the Communist Party and he would not disown that party. In his own words, I quote Justice Krishnaiyer, in short, I declined Menon's pleasing proposal. Thus, early in my political career, I stood for principle. One of the greatest assets of Justice Krishnaiyer is standing for principle. He says, I stood for principle and I kept on consistently this leftist dimension as an independent, both in the assembly and public life. Later, as a judge, I became a leftist, but independent, and remain even now as a public figure with a leftist slant. He has admitted it. In the country, then he says, we come to, in fact, many people are not aware that during his period as a judge of as a minister in Kerala, in charge of home affairs, he was responsible for the appointment of First Lady High Court Judge in India, Justice Anna Chandni. Then we come to a very unsavory part of it. He never hesitated to criticize the higher judiciary. In fact, very harsh words he says about the higher judiciary. although he himself was a part. He says, today the judiciary is suffering from unbecoming misbehavior syndrome. He advocated the appointment of performance commission to eliminate judges who are guilty of goofiness and gross culpability. In a bitter attack on the system, Justice Iyer said, the status of Judiciary Court, the status of judiciary is no longer a mere case of bribe-taking or deciding cases in favor of the wealthy class. Judges have become cunning and criminal in their operations. Very harsh words. Luckily, they are yet few, but it is bad enough. On the qualitative work of the Indian higher judiciary, Justice Iyer very caustically observed, I quote, judges are qualitatively becoming illiterate and character-wise dubious, largely because the collegium has no investigative machinery nor obligatory principles for selection. Consequently, favoritism, nepotism, casteism, and other extraneous considerations spoil the selection. In the absence of performance commission, corruption creeps into the process of judicial functionalism. His suggestion, this is what I say, his suggestion that there should be an appointment commission, a performance commission, and an anti-corruption commission to keep a constant watch over judges, I am afraid may not be implemented for the self-evident reason that the National Judicial Appointments Commission Act was struck down by the Supreme Court, with the consequence the collegial system has come to stay with firm roots. Justice Iyer, he has earned the enduring praise of many sections of the society. His work was greatly appreciated by the bar. The admiration of the bar has reached the stage of reverence, which was not extended to any other judge. This is reflected in the resolution passed by the Supreme Court Bar Association on the eve of his retirement. Although in the beginning, on his assumption of office as a judge of the Supreme Court, the bar was skeptical about his objectivity in view of his leftist affiliations. A few excerpts from the address presented by Sri L.M. Singhvi on behalf of the Bar Association on 15th November 1980, the date of retirement of Justice Krishna Iyer, deserves special mention. I quote, no judge at the Supreme Court has received such an encomium from the bar. I quote, our verdict is a decree of affection and admiration. Let us also declare in these proceedings, which are sui generis, that we are not only your judges, but also your judgment debtors. It was in stormy weather that you first book your seat on the Supreme Court bench on 17th of July 1973. Some members of the bar were apprehensive that your appointment may not contribute to the traditions of judicial detachment, but those who came to scoff stayed on to respect and to admire. Then he said, there's a last Thursday, the weather was crisp and bright, but in the court where you sat, there was a humid air. Eyes were moist. We felt that a great intellectual and a great gentleman was sitting in the court for the last time. In a span of little over 7 years, you have brought distinction to the highest court of the land. Indeed, you did more than that. You opened its doors wider to the poor, the needy, and the indigent. Your crusade for legal aid and law reform, your concern for and commitment to the common people, your dedication to the creed of human rights, and your allegiance to judicial independence and rule of law have become quintessential catalysts in our legal process. These humane contributions have endeared you to one and all and will long be cherished and remembered in and out of law reports and in and out of law courts. Yours has been a restless and rebellious quest for justice. You have dared and defied, and you have drawn your sword of thoughts and words when many would have been content to be reticent and complacent. Your ideas have seldom failed to stir and to provoke. Sometimes you may have gone too far, and sometimes you may not have gone far enough, but at all times there was unfailing courtesy and consideration going hand in hand with a spiritual transcendence and equipoise of goodwill, sincerity, compassion, and understanding in your judicial and extrajudicial pathways, all that we will remember and cherish for a long time. Many of your judgments have given a new dimension and a new direction to law. In many of them, you rode the unruly horse of public policy with exceptional skill, acumen, and erudition, and brought it to heel on the path of justice and good conscience. In some of them, you rode it too hard, but there was always your shining faith in the true role and destiny of law in a developing society, which made you the lyricist, the poet laureate, and the visionary of a socially aware and socially accountable third world jurisprudence. Then my conclusions about him is this. The weak and vulnerable sections always looked to him for guidance and help. He espoused every public cause for benefiting the poor. His wise counsels always were available to public men and leaders of political parties. He never gave legal opinions for consideration. He never accepted any assignment as an arbitrator after his retirement. He did not accept any office which carried remuneration after retirement. He was the chairman of the Kerala State Law Commission, taking an honorarium of ₹1 per month, and this he did out of his great attachment for his home state and the desire to serve the people. Chief ministers and governors sought his advice on many issues concerning public affairs. Justice for the poor was his motto. A strong believer in constitutionalism, he strove hard for a just society as envisaged in the directive principles of state policy. His effulgence was all pervasive. He was the founder of Independent Initiative, a body comprising persons of blemishless public service, which keeps a vigil on important actions of the state affecting the lives and liberties of the people. He proved himself a people's ombudsman. The only elective office he contested after his retirement was President of India as the consensus candidate set up by the opposition parties. His opponent was Sri Venkatraman, nominee of the ruling party. Had he won, the office of President of India would have undergone a new dimension. Although government has not honored him with the highest civilian award, Bharat Ratna, the people regarded him as the real Bharat Ratna. His residential house in Ernakulam, worth several crores, he has donated for charity for housing a hospital, a rare gesture, the like of which we have not seen. There is no field of activity concerning public affairs untouched by Justice Krishna Iyer during his enviable and illustrious life stretching to a century. The footprints, permanent and indelible, he left remind the succeeding generations his mission in life and the success he achieved. With this, my talk has come to an end. I am grateful for the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts concerning Justice Krishna Iyer. In fact, I had personal acquaintance with him. People from Andhra Pradesh may be knowing that there is a legislation called Land Grabbing Act, Prevention of Land Grabbing Act, Prevention of Land Grabbing. That act was the brainchild of Justice Krishna Iyer. When I was Secretary Law, I had occasion to discuss with him for quite a few days as to how the act should be drafted. In fact, it was his idea that civil and criminal jurisdiction should be vested in one authority, and the procedure should be simple, complying with principles of natural justice that stood the test of time. In fact, I enjoyed his affection in a great measure. That's why, in fact, there is no one in our country who was treated almost like a god by all sections of the people. He stood for the people. He was the man for the poor. I feel that whenever people were in distress, they looked to a man who was an expert in the field of law, and that is Justice Krishna Iyer. Wherever he went, whatever advice he tendered, he was always looked upon with greatest respect and also reverence. And with this, my talk is coming to an end. So I am greatly thankful for the patience you have shown in listening to this tedious talk, I should say. It is not an inspiring talk, because
No, sir,
it
is inspiring. It is inspiring.
I could not prepare it the way I wanted, for many reasons. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice M.N. Rao, sir. May I request Ramkumar, sir, for your comments, sir?
Excellent articulation, sir, on the Bhishmacharya of Indian judiciary. despite being in the twilight zone, sir, you have made roses blossom.
Ah, very flattering.
Excellent,
Yes.
excellent. Well said, well said.
It is Justice Krishna Iyer was a man who really practiced what he preached. Justice Krishna Iyer has been very beautifully sketched by you, touching almost every aspect of his verdicts. Wonderful articulation, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Ramkumar sir. Justice Sitaramamurthy sir.
I have got high regard for his lordship. What can I say? I will only say that his lordship presented a pen picture of Justice Krishna Iyer, yesterday's legend, a living legend, who lives in his judgments ever after. In Justice Krishna Iyer's judgments, we find poetic prose. He coins his thoughts with words with rhyme. For example, we can take that judgment of Moti Ram. While holding in front of Moti Ram, his lordship said in the judgment, "We the people of India is meant for the butcher, the baker and the candlestick maker," and gives a pass with a dash and adds, "Shall we add the bonded labor and the pavement dweller?" That's how many of his judgments, Justice Krishna Iyer, we find poetic prose. I'm deeply beholden to his lordship, Justice M.N. Rao Garu. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
I have one caveat, Mr. Sitaramurthy. The days of my lording were over long ago. It was 20 years.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We appreciate your sincerity and modesty.
But
We appreciate
you are a
your
lot.
modesty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
May I request Justice M.V. Ramana sir.
I'm too small to speak of either the legend Justice Krishna Iyer or my Lord Honorable Justice M.N. Rao Garu. With the usual precision and necessary details, which is quite usual for His Lordship, has presented. But I'm very sorry to say that I joined late. Anyway, I enjoyed the speech of Justice M.N. Rao Garu for a long time. And on earlier occasions, I heard him several times at Hyderabad. But today, I never wanted to lose, but for some reason, I could not join immediately. Anyway, I'm really grateful to hear His Lordship once again. I'm also glad to see Justice Parvatrao Garu on screen, and probably I may not get an occasion again to see him here along with Justice M.N. Rao Garu. So grateful to you. Really wonderful selection, Mr. Shyam.
Thank you.
I'll really congratulate you.
Thank you very much, sir. Justice Ramashan sir.
Really, it's a good presentation on Justice Krishna Iyer. I don't think that anybody can make such a presentation within a short time in an effective manner. As Justice Rao has said, he's a multifaceted personality. Though he was a leftist believer, it never reflected in his judgments in such a way as to say that he is going beyond the law and outside the purview of the law for the purpose of importing his thoughts on protecting the weaker section in a legalistic way. That is the way in which we can appreciate the way in which this has been done. One occasion, I have no personal, though he was coming from my place, that is Thalassery. I have no personal acquaintance with him for a long time. But when I was an additional district judge in Calicut, I think somebody in consumer court, the order was passed, but it was not handed, a copy was not received. I do not know how he got my number. I do not know. He immediately called me and said, "What is Mr. Ramakrishnan? What is going on in your district?" I said, "Sir, I am not holding the post of a consumer." No, you must do something for this. And I said that otherwise I will do one thing. I will inform the Chief Justice to take action against that person who is responsible for not providing the copy. But there may be some, I told him that there may be some reasons, because it is though it is held by a judicial person, his limitations over the staff will be less sometimes. Then he said, no, that is not a reason. You will have to do something. I have no option but to accede to that. And not only that, there was a warrant given to me saying that you must inform me what happened also. I will be in Calicut for some time. In the evening, by the evening, you will have to know who is the person holding that post and also see what happened. Then I will have to search for, because he was under the impression that it is in Calicut district. But when I inquired about it, I came to understand it is from Kannur district. Then I will have to talk to the judge. He is a good friend of mine. I told him the position, that this is the position. Then he immediately said that I will see that something is done, because Mr. Ramakrishnan, this is a difficulty coefficient, and this is normally once you deliver judgment and sign it, it will have to be sent by them by post. So I will see that it is verified, and then immediately he took steps. I do not know, within 2 days it reached that person. Then I contacted Krishna and said, "Sir, this has been done." Now that good. That is a way in which he, react when some complaints have come to him, to his knowledge about non-performance of certain things, which is in his expectation ought to have been done, irrespective of the difficulties that the office is facing. And I also, one occasion, had to be with him when the Padma Bhushan or Padma Shri was granted to him. The Calicut has given a welcome.
Padma Bhushan.
Padma Bhushan. At that time also, he is very simple and saying that these are all not things I wanted. I want what is required is the system must rise to the occasion and meet the needs of the people. That was Justice Krishnaiyer. Really, it's and that is the reason why, in spite of the fact that he was not holding any post, irrespective of politics, everybody were approaching him for getting advice on things which are required for the purpose of better governance and also for the purpose of meeting the needs of the poor. That is Justice Krishnaiyer. Really, it is a subject that has been rightly chosen by Shyam Padman on his 150th birthday. I congratulate Shyam Padman also for selecting the subject and also selecting the speaker who had, what to say, I cannot say it is done justice more than that for the subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justice Ramakrishnan, sir. The person responsible for getting the speaker is very much here, Justice Kodandaram, and along with him we have Justice Parvada Rao sir as well. Over to you, sir.
What is that? This M.N. Rao is always very thorough. And he has been giving all the aspects of Krishnayer's judgments and the development of law, the contribution to the justice. So actually, he is one of the greatest judges. So it's a very important subject that was taken up, and I'm happy that sense of justice is explained fully. Thank you.
Kodandaram, sir.
I'm too small to say anything about erudition of Justice M.N. Rao. And but at the same time, always whenever I read the Justice Krishnayer's judgments, earlier I used to have a prejudice with regard to many of these leftist judges, that there's more of theory than the interpretation in subject. But one thing I noticed over a period of time is that Krishnaiyer and also a few of the other judges, though they had explained the concept, they never transgressed the interpretational, the manner in which the statute has to be interpreted. They never went out of the way of transgressing the limits. At the same time, certainly pointing out the thing, and this seminar today has brought out a few more things for my notes. So he had rather inspired me to read some of other judgments which I have left out over a period of time. For reading. In fact, in that context only, I would like to put a poser to Justice M.N. Rao. how far Justice Krishna Iyer's wishes or the aspirations have come true, and what is your take on the present day of the courts and overall the judicial system responding to or following what he has realized and he has asked the society to notice? Because you are still currency, you are not yet become obsolete. Just
Absolutely, absolutely.
The question is for me.
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir, for you.
Thank you.
For
My
you.
God. So you want to put me in a tight spot.
Okay, I know. In fact, myself and our Krishna having a dialogue. What the presentation which you have made is available in the book. What is not available in the book is what we were looking forward.
A very close friend of mine, who unfortunately is not now alive, Mr. Krishnamani, he was president of the Supreme Court Bar Association. When we were discussing very candidly about the system, he requested me, Mr. Rao, why not we have an open session, introspection. What ails the system? I said, Mr. Krishnamani, as long as I am practicing here, for that matter, as long as anyone is practicing here, what ails the system? He will not be in a position to say fully, truthfully, and completely. Because every day you have to stand before the court, if not every day, occasionally, whenever the chance comes. So what troubles everybody is that we know what is happening, but you are not in a position to say why it is happening. For example, I personally feel that, in fact, the striking down of the National Judicial Appointments Commission Act, in fact, that is a very unhappy judgment according to me. In fact, had it been there, perhaps the present controversies that are plaguing the judiciary would not have been there. In fact, nobody says that judiciary should remain unaccountable. But at the same time, a few cases here and there, they are giving very bad name to the institution. There are people who claim that they can do anything and everything and get away. I mean, if I am not transgressing my limits, what happened in the case of Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi? Everybody is talking. The international community condemned him. You cannot come across anybody, a single advocate of the Supreme Court who will support him openly. But the system has paid the price for it. So if you want to ask me, these are the things. The first trouble started with the second judge's case. Chief Justice Verma, who was the author of the judgment, second judge's case. In fact, in a way, he is responsible for the present day controversies ailing this institution. After writing the judgment, after his retirement, he said, my judgment was wrong. I have not come across in the history of any country's judiciary the author of a judgment after a few years saying, my judgment was wrong. Then why did he write it? Out of 43 years of the experience during which the system was in vogue, only on 7 occasions there was disagreement between the executive and the judiciary. And now he has wholly sidetracked the entire issue. Today it is not given to anybody to set it right. In fact, the Supreme Court bench invited suggestions from the public how to improve the collegium system. Several people have sent suggestions. In my own humble way, I also have sent a suggestion. My suggestion was, if there is a complaint against a judge, then the Chief Justice should mildly tell him. If there is a second complaint, he should be warned. Third complaint, he should be transferred to some other court. If in the other court also, if the same thing is repeated, there should be a law to pension him off. So you can save the collegium system. The second thing is, whenever recommendations are made, that at least 2/3 of the full court accept the recommendations. So without disturbing the system, with a few changes and with a little more transparency, you can bring about efficiency. But that's not being done now. So who is responsible for it? And when people like us we don't count for anything in the hierarchy. I suppose, this is Kodanram. I think I have gone a little out of way in trying to be more candid than what I should have been.
Not at all.
No. Candid talk is very essential at your age and stage of life, sir. Who else can speak so candidly?
And that too in an academic platform, sir. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Just like Krishna was doing.
Yeah. See, after all, our nation is known for hypocrisy. We don't want to hear any hypocrite speeches. At your age and stage, we want candid speeches like yours.
See what is happening. I try to present before you, and then psychophancy. My God.
Exactly. Psychophancy, hypocrisy defines Indians. Let us not beat around the bush.
Sir, justice to the common man, justice to the doorsteps. Should not judgments be simply worded? I mean, should not simple English be used in judgments, sir, so that the common man also understand what is right, so what is getting.
As language. English using.
English, why not the local language?
Definitely, sir.
No, very difficult to translate also sometimes. The local language, I don't find any words will not be available sometimes to translate his judgments. Anyhow,
So it's not local language, but how nations function as one unit?
Language is a very troublesome question. And if you allow me to say that on the language question, there was so much of controversy. Official Language Act, it expired in 1965. Hindi shall be the official language for 15 years. That is what the Constitution says. Then when that period expired, there were riots in India, in South India, in Chennai, in Hyderabad and other places. Two ministers, Subramaniam and Santanam, at the central cabinet, tendered their resignations. Lal Bahadur Shastri was the Prime Minister. He forwarded the resignation to the President, Dr. Radhakrishnan, for acceptance. Dr. Radhakrishnan called the Prime Minister and said, Mr. Shastri, you want the country to be broken up? To be balkanized? He said, what, sir, why are you saying that? Then why do you want to accept these resignations? I don't rule out a secessionist movement in the South. Then what should I do? Reject the resignations, and then a law was made. The result is, unless all the non-Hindi speaking states pass resolutions requesting that Hindi shall be the official language, English shall continue as the associate language of the country. So, in fact, we have a body called Retired Judges Association. I happen to be vice president of it for a term. When I attended the meeting, one of the brother judges from the north wanted to move a resolution saying that the language of the court shall be Hindi. He wanted that provision in the constitution to be deleted. I said, if that is the case, people like me have no place here. So you cannot speak one South Indian language. What is your right to say that the entire language of the court should be, and throughout the country should be Hindi?
Exactly.
He had no answer for it. He had no answer. See, these regional issues are so emotional. So they lead to deadly consequences.
Balkanization of the country. Balkanization.
And in fact, it is a miracle that we are able to continue as a nation thanks to visionaries like Jawaharlal Nehru.
Precisely, Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you. Yes.
See, it is very easy to say, come on, take off the English. Take off the English. What happens if you take off the English?
That's the doom of the country. That's the end of the country.
I remember when Annadhuri became Rajya Sabha member, his first speech, it was a thundering speech in Parliament, in Rajya Sabha. He posed the question, my language is different, my food habits are different, my dress is different, my background is different, my culture is different. In what way you and I are one? But for the fact that you speak English, I convey my ideas to you in English, you convey your ideas to me in English.
Precisely.
And then Jawaharlal Nehru was so much stunned The result was next day he got an invitation for dinner with the Prime Minister, and Prime Minister greatly appreciated his talent. He became one of the admirers of Jawaharlal Nehru. So wherever there is talent, wherever there is reality, you must be fair enough to admit. So these are all languages. If you want, let local language be there for courts. But at the higher level, the language, there should be one common language for the whole country.
So even when English is being used, is it not better to use simple English?
Simply, yes, you can. But of course, these days, to write good English is a difficult thing.
That is one of the criticisms against Justice Krishna Iyer.
Yes.
His
But,
English. One has to understand.
that comes to him spontaneously. I have seen Justice Krishna Iyer dictating judgments in the Supreme Court spontaneously.
Yes.
Spontaneously.
You should have a dictionary too.
Of course, sometimes. And you see, once I told him, sir, you have used the expression, nothing succeeds like excess.
Excess.
Nothing succeeds like excess.
Okay.
Then he said, why did you remember it? He said, sir, it is something out of your nature. We all heard nothing succeeds like success, but you said nothing succeeds like excess.
Beautiful.
He has coined various expressions.
Yes.
Yeah. The one which I like is the bail, not jail.
Correct. Exactly.
All youngsters, we like
Bail
that.
or jail.
Daridranarayana.
Yes.
These are all the words being used by
Daridranarayana, yes.
Daridranarayana.
Correct.
But he's a very simple man, simple habits.
Yes.
I was heading the Judicial Academy in Hyderabad. Several times he was our guest. He always used like simple food. His lunch was only rice, one curry, sambar, dahi, and one plantain. He always deprecated the idea of hosting huge lunches. He said, Mr. Rao, why should money be wasted?
Correct. Sumptuous lunches. Yeah, why should
It is,
correct.
if it is working lunch, it should be working lunch.
Precisely.
Sir,
Attire also.
yeah.
Attire also very simple attire. His dress patterns very simple.
Yes, always that kurta and then
Mundu.
White and white. No, normally white and white.
it's always white and white.
Mr. Padman, may I have a minute on the language issue?
Sure,
Mr.
sure.
Padman?
Please.
Yeah. See, my understanding is there is nothing like simple English or complex English. There is only one English. See, the only difference is we should all learn to write and use English as it is instead of Telugu man speaking English, Malayali speaking English, Tamil speaking English. If only we get rid of this regional thing into English language, it becomes automatically good English. Only then, on the contrary, when you learn chaste English, it empowers you intellectually. Like Justice Kodandram just pointed out, bail and jail, 2 words. It is still 50 years old slogan, bail and jail. Even today it's helping us. And therefore, there is nothing like simple English. The only thing is, legalese can be reduced. Legalese can be a minimal legalese. Chaste English language will go a long way in empowering not only our professional lives, but also intellectual lives too. Thank you.
Correct. Can we have the comments of Prem and so that the 147th session can come to a culmination? Prem, please. Well, sir, that was indeed a great tribute to Justice Krishna Iyer, who indeed was a legend, a phenomenon, he was a one-man army as against injustice. He was a great reformist who has spent various landmark judgments. Justice Iyer, he of course was a very prolific writer who has authored more than around 100 books. He has around 1,000 articles, apart from delivering, say, countless prestigious lectures. But as we all know, his judgments, as Shyam Ayrton told, had people scampering for lexicons. Those were never mere words of learned length or merely thundering sounds, which were designed to, say, amaze the gazing rustics who were ranged round. But it was on a correct application of law
and it really bore the heart of justice. And it was grounded on human experience. And Chief Justice Rao today, having cited several judgments of Justice Krishna Iyer, I would not endeavor to cite more, but I am tempted to cite one striking illustration. It is the riverine imagery used by Justice Krishna Iyer to expound how the holy book, which we call the Constitution of India, it was modeled on the British model of the Westminster form of government, as it is opposed to the American presidential model. Now, Justice Rao has already told the decision that it is Jamshed Singh's case, which has been already mentioned in his talk, wherein the powers of the cabinet vis-a-vis the president were interpreted or rather decoded. And this was a case where Chief Justice Ray delivered the judgment quoted on his behalf and 5 other learned judges. And Justice Krishna Iyer penning his own separate judgment quoted on his behalf of Justice Bhagawati, and went on to state that the law of our constitution, any student of political history and of comparative constitutional system will normally agree that it is partly eclectic, but primarily on an Indo-Anglian version of the Westminster model. And he goes on to say that it is not the Potomac, but the Thames, which fertilizes the flow of the Yamuna. See the riverine imagery. And on this day, when we commemorate this legend's 105th birthday, I really bow down my head before this great soul and wind up my words. And fully being alive, that I'm too small to speak of this great legendary personality, and with the greatest possible respect, I would like to ask Chief Justice Rao just one question. Now, I may not be misunderstood, because this is a question which genuinely lingers in my mind, and it is rather a conundrum. Sir, we have the judgment of Maharao Bhim Singh Ji's case. We have 3 judgments of Bhim Singh Ji. The 2 judgments, they are constitutional bench decisions, which have a great bearing on our constitutional law itself. The first judgment, which I would cite, is AR 1981 Supreme Court 234, wherein it was one which dealt with the constitutionality of the Urban Land Sealing and Regulation Act of 1976.
What is the judgment? What is the case?
It is Bhim Singh Ji's case, AR 1981 Supreme Court 234.
Bhim Singh case, land reforms. Yes. Yes.
And reforms. And that was inserted in the 9th schedule by the 40th Amendment Act of the Constitution. In that case, there are 4 separate judgments. The first judgment is delivered by Chief Justice Y.V. Chandrachud, who speaks for himself and for Justice Bhagawati. And kindly see, there are 3 other separate judgments. One is by Justice Krishna Iyer, the other one by Justice Tulsipur, and the other is one by Justice A.P. Sen. Now, here, Justice Tulsipur holds that the statute it is unconstitutional. The other 4 learned judges agrees to him in part, of course, in part. Now, kindly see, sir, the Chief Justice judgment that consists merely of 6 paragraphs. Hardly 6 paragraphs. And the 6th paragraph, it mentions that fuller reasons of his judgment, that is the fuller reasons of the judgment of the Chief Justice, that would follow later. That is mentioned in para 6. From para 7 starts Justice Krishna Iyer's judgment. The first sentence what Justice Krishna Iyer says is, I agree with the Chief Justice both regarding the constitutionality of the legislation and also the partial invalidation of section 27 of that particular statute. And he explains reasons why he cannot agree with Justice Tulsipur. Now, this was just prior to the date of retirement of Justice Krishna Iyer. I think this was on, during November 13th of 1980. Now, the reasons which were reserved by the Chief Justice, that comes 4.5 years later, which is seen in AR 1985 Supreme Court 1650. Again, another judgment which contains hardly of a few paragraphs, 5 or 6 in numbers, in which Justice Chandrachud goes on to say that the 81 judgment was hurriedly pronounced as Justice Krishna Iyer was to retire shortly, and that the learned judges merely discussed various points arising in this matter. And Justice Chandrachud makes it absolutely clear that it is not possible to express agreement with the line of reasoning of a judgment without examining the judgment carefully. So that means Justice Chandrachud had not delivered his judgment with reasons. And it is that unreasoned judgment of Justice Chandrachud to which Justice Krishna Iyer concurred. If the sentence in the 85 judgment is correct, how could we say that Justice Krishna Iyer, who concurred with the unreasoned judgment of Justice Chandrachud, is that right or is that wrong? Because this has been a question that has been vexing my mind.
I am afraid I cannot answer this right now. I need a little time to go into it. You see, these judgments, sometimes we see, for example, recently on the question of reservation, Nagaraj case was there. Nagaraj case, Article 16 amendments. The constitutionality was challenged. The 5-judge bench upheld. Justice Kapadia wrote the judgment. Justice Kapadia has followed Indra Sahani case. He says what is made applicable to backward classes for purpose of identifying them as social and educationally backward class. The test he made applicable to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. See, the very name scheduled caste and scheduled tribe itself is suggestive of their backwardness. But still, Kapadia said there must be an inquiry into their social and educational backwardness. There should be a survey whether that class of people are adequately represented in services. Justice Balakrishnan signed that judgment. Justice Balakrishnan, champion of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, himself was supposed to be a victim of the social segregation. He has signed that judgment. My own feeling is, when judges send their judgments for signature, they only agree on the conclusion. Ultimately, he affirmed the constitutionality. He did not strike down. But he said it must be read in the light of these things. So, what was intended by the constitution makers was nullified in the interpretation, although the judgment went in favor of the state. And Justice Balakrishnan signed it. If I were to be a judge, I would not sign it unless I go through it. On the other hand, such a thing would not happen in England. When a judge writes, after hearing is over, there is what is called judicial conference. They meet, they discuss what should be the. So if 5 judges are there, if 2 judges say we follow this line and 3 judges differ, they simply say you write your judgment, we write our judgments. So it is not as if the one who writes first, he circulates and the others write meeting the arguments. So you are not supposed to attack what the other judge has said. You are supposed to give your own views on that. So the result is justice that had to a review petition was filed and partly the review was allowed. The second thing, the other judge, Justice Nariman, said no, there must be an inquiry into the social and educational backwardness. The creamy layer concept should be there. So certain things had crept in. That is because the system of a judgment delivery. So they don't meet before that. So when they circulate the judgment, they look at the conclusion and they sign. So this is what happened.
But sir, normally to concur.
I may also tell you, at one time, a very, very difficult situation arose long back, about 35 years back. You see, an appeal came before us. It was an appeal against judgment of Justice Ramaswamy, rendered sitting singly. Justice Ramaswamy, after he went to Supreme Court, he wrote a separate but concurrent judgment, approving his own judgment, rendered single. So that was Delhi transport case, 7-judge bench judgment. So he has said, the Andhra Pradesh High Court has rightly said, so he has approved his own judgment. When the appeal came before us, the Advocate General was appearing for the appellant, the state. Then the other side, Justice Raghuram, he was at the bar at that time, the present director of the National Judicial Academy at Bhopal. So he was appearing for the private party. He said, the Advocate General, he said that this court has no right to hear this appeal because the appeal has already been confirmed by the Supreme Court. Justice Ramaswamy approved it. Then the question came, Advocate General said he can't do it. But what is the authority for it?
True, sir.
And then I had to dig into the past. I was able to locate one House of Lords judgment. There they said, when judgments are circulated, it is only to enable other judges to know what are the views. If you have any doubts, you send your reply, your objections. But if you don't send objections, whatever views one judge expresses it means they have the concurrence of the other judges. So whether there is no, if you want to disagree, you must write a separate piece of dissent on those aspects. If you don't do it, it means you have agreed with all the aspects. So I said, since Justice Ramaswamy's judgment was circulated to other judges and there was no dissent, it means the High Court judgment was approved by the Supreme Court. Then I wrote a small dissertation like judgment and then said, we cannot hear the appeal. The funniest thing is the matter came before the Supreme Court. The judges were not in a position to do what to do, then how to meet it. What the Supreme Court said is, heard the counsel for both sides, we will set aside the judgment, the matter is remanded to the High Court for disposal in accordance with law. Then how do you meet that situation? See, the questions which I raised, the dissertation I have made, the reasoning I have given, has not been touched at all. They were in a great hurry to dispose of matters. They remanded matter to us. You decide in accordance with law. We wanted a light from the Supreme Court to say what the law is, not to remit it to the High Court to decide in accordance with law. What we have decided was in accordance with law, according to our understanding. So these are all things which, I see, that is because we have not reached that stage of perfection. I mean,
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And regarding the language, the usage of English language, there was a case in 2017 before His Lordship Justice Deepak Gupta, where a particular judgment, a particular judgment which I think it was more than 50 pages, which came from High Court of Rajasthan, that was remanded back to the High Court for fresh consideration. The Supreme Court going on to say
we cannot
understand what is written in this judgment.
No, it happened many times. Many times it happens. It happens many times.
It transcends normal comprehension. Sir,
thank you so much, sir. That was absolutely wonderful, brilliant. Thank you so much, sir.
Sir, we have Justice Arjit Prasad, sir, among us. Sir, would it be possible for you to unmute? I mean, I was trying to do it from my end, but it is not happening. I think it's happening. Sir is here, but not able to connect.
We'll wind up.
Yes. So that
evening function.
Yeah, correct. I know.
We can invite everybody for the evening function also.
I leave it to you, sir. Of course. We have another session also in the evening regarding Justice V.R. Krishna, sir, and I'm sure that Ramkumar sir would be in that, and other dignitaries also. Your presence are solicited in that, yes. And thus we I think the link etc. will be provided. I believe.
Yes.
Yes. Sir. That brings us to the end of the 147th session of Legal Empowerment through Interaction lecture series. While thanking Justice Kodandaram sir, we do put on record our appreciation, sir, Justice M.N. Rao sir, for that wonderful talk on Justice V.R. Krishna sir. It's not just collating decisions, but it is inspiring us because our generation and the generation after us, before us, all were truly inspired by the way in which the different dimensions in which same things or issues were dealt with by Justice V.R. Krishna, which in fact enriched the justice dispensation machinery and the legal system there in the country. Thank you very much, sir. And we are also thankful for the valuable presence and inputs of Justice V. Ramkumar, Justice Ramakrishnan sir, Justice Siddharama Murthy sir, Kodandaram sir, and also Rao sir and Justice Ramana sir, and all of you. Wonderful participants for making this session really interactive. Thank you very much. Till we meet again. Yes, sir.
I will pass on the written paper because this is
definitely, sir. Definitely, sir. We'll put it in the group and we'll definitely share it. We are sorry that we could not have some words from Justice Arjit Prasad, sir, but I hope in another session we'll definitely have the blessings of Justice Arjit Prasad, sir, as well. So till we meet again next Friday, please do take care and stay safe. Thank you.